Chapter 9. Michael Newman walked from the cabinet shop to the schoolhouse in a line as straight as if he had drawn it with his carpenter's pencil. The pockets of his apron bulged with nails. He carried a hammer and an assortment of small wooden blocks. The afternoon was rainy and chill. Michael called to the farm boss, "Get the wheat in or it'll be caught in a freeze." "Do you forget we've got a combine now?" the farm boss called back. "If the combine works, well and good," Michael replied. "It's not new, you know." Little Mike ran from the shop, his arms loaded with thin strips of wood, slipping in behind his father as Michael swung open the schoolhouse door. Mike saw Sarah Mother at the table where the pastor always sat at church time. Before her was a heap of white curtain material on which she was busy working. "Where's the job?" Michael demanded. "And why didn't you tell me I needed a step ladder?" "Here's a chair that's just the size," said Sarah, getting up. Michael seized the chair and planted it near a window. "Woman's work," he grumbled. "Curtains in the school. Next, curtains in the houses. Then curtains in the barns. And pretty soon Carpenter Michael Newman will be called Colony Curtain Hanger. Hey, Mike, quick with those rods, and we'll get this done." "Were there 8 or 10, Michael father?" Michael was already on the chair. "Count the windows," he said. "10, little Mike reported. "That's what I brought, I think." "You think," said Michael, nailing a wooden bracket into place above the window. "What were you thinking this morning when I told you to measure the broken window in the chicken house? What were you thinking when I saw you down on your hands and knees near the schoolhouse steps, pecking around like a goose? Don't get the idea that just because there are visitors here, I don't know what's going on. Pound, pound." Michael's hammer set 2 wooden brackets in a line across the top of the window. He stood on the chair with his mouth full of nails. Imperiously, he leaned back as far as he dared and surveyed the brackets for their relationship to an imaginary line. Sarah looked up. "Have you got 2 in place already?" she asked, surprised. "Naturally," said Michael, spitting the nails into his hand. "Should it take me all afternoon? I don't get paid by the hour, Miss Newman. Just do a good job," pleaded Sarah. "Hand me up a rod, Mike," Michael ordered. Little Mike obediently gave him one of the rods and watched as his father laid it into the grooves of the wooden brackets. "There, you see," Michael exclaimed exultantly. "It fits like a mitten." "It looks to me like that one is lower," Sarah told him. "That right one." "Maybe you should be carpenter boss," Michael answered. "From where I see them, they're as straight as a path to a privy." Little Mike laughed. His father pushed his hat back on his head and viewed his work haughtily. "Well," Sarah sighed, "give me the rod and I'll put the curtain on." "It will probably wiggle when it's hung." "It will not wiggle," Michael insisted. "Anyhow, when the curtain is on it, who will see whether the rod fits in the brackets or not? That, my good wife, is a lesson. That's how things are done in the world. One thing hides another thing, but as long as the thing that is seen fools the eye, everybody is satisfied." Sarah was unimpressed with this reasoning, and as she took the rod from him she said, "What has our curtain hanging to do with the world, I'd like to know?" Everything, Michael told her. We certainly all know it's world influence that is suddenly putting curtains up on windows which have always been without curtains. Sarah said, "You know that isn't so. There was enough complaining that the sun always hit us in the eyes every Sunday morning." Michael said, "That was the complaint, yes, that put it over with the elders." Sarah made believe she did not hear. She started putting the rod through the hem of the curtain, while Michael moved his chair to the next window. "But they will be nice, Michael father," said little Mike. "Nice," Michael grumbled. "All of a sudden everything must be nice. The curtains must be nice. The window rods must be nice. World influence. The nicest things are the natural things. Natural grain in the wood, natural color in the wood, the way the good Lord put it there. Pound, pound, pound." Michael father did not understand. With him everything was work and getting things done. What if the brackets weren't just straight? What if they weren't polished or painted? Michael father did not get any pleasure out of seeing pretty things like the curtains. Would he have thought the harmonica pretty? Michael, moving the chair to the next window, was struck by a question. "You know, Sarah," he said, "there is something very strange about Joshua Volkner and this family of his." Sarah did not look at him. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I thought his wife was coming, but only the children came. What kind of business is that?" "Well, she didn't want to come, and that's the way women do in the world. Don't think women everywhere are the way women are here in the colony." "Well," Michael exclaimed in amazement, "do you hear what I hear, little Mike? We are getting a schoolhouse lesson on what women in the world are like. Where in heaven's name do you get your information, Sarah?" Sarah shrugged. "Everybody knows that women in the world have the say. That surely is no secret." "I guess not," Michael exclaimed. "But in 400 years of Futarian history, no woman has ever had the idea that maybe she might get to be that way." "Who said anything like that?" Sarah wanted to know. "I would surely go with you if you went somewhere." "Where am I going?" Michael cried. "I said if you were going somewhere." "The only place I'm going," said Michael, "is to the Jordan Ranch, when we buy that, and I go there to work to get it ready for the new Canadian colony. And you stay here. A woman's place is at home." "And that's just where Miss Joshua Volkner probably is," Sarah concluded. "Get to work," Michael ordered. "Mike, what are you doing standing there? Help your mother get those curtains on. What's the matter with you? Always thinking. That's what gets people into trouble." Pound, pound, pound. Under Michael father's ambitious hammer, the brackets went promptly into place. "Right to the fraction," Michael said as he completed another window. "I tell you, Sarah, if you had to get work like this done out in the world, you would have to wait a long time. Here in the commune, all you have to do is get a boss to say it should be done, and it is done." "Look," little Mike exclaimed, holding up one of the curtains. "Color stitching." Sarah snatched the curtain from his hand. Just the date cross-stitched in. Michael looked down. "I wouldn't say that was necessary." "It's pretty, Michael father," little Mike told him. "Look, red and green." "It's useless and expensive, and it took time," Michael observed. "Rachel and I did it so that you didn't even notice the time it took," said Sarah. "Here, now this one is ready to hang. My work is the nailing, and I'm just about through," he informed her. "Well, put this up, please. You're standing right there." Michael took the curtain and laid it across the brackets. Then he stepped down and stood back to examine the innovation. Sarah saw his face grow stern and thoughtful. "They will tie back like this," she hastened to say, tucking the curtains back with her hands. "If they're intended to keep out the sun, as you made the elders believe," Michael said, "then they'd better hang so they can keep the sun out. But today there is no sun, so who can tell how to hang them?" And the red and green color stitching he reflected heavily. If the elders and the pastor allow this, then the commune gate is open wider than I think it is. Don't be too sure. These are being put up for time and eternity. I'll look at them from the outside. He strode out into the yard. "Come, Mike," said Sarah anxiously. "You hold back one and I the other, and hold it far back for now." Together they held back the curtains so that Michael could see the effect. He stood in the yard with his hands on his hips, his hat pushed back. He tilted his head this way and that. He pointed with his hand. "Over more with your side, Mike," said Sarah. Together they looked out. "Do you think he likes them, Sarah Mother? Do you think the elders will let them stay?" "Of course they will. Who can help but like them?" Michael entered in a hurry to get the rest of the brackets in place. "They look like something hanging from a clothesline," he commented, "and they'll catch the dust. But if the rest of the colony can stand them, I guess I can." Pound, pound, pound. Little Mike helped his mother thread the curtains over the rods. The long cross strips were rough. Michael had not been too careful in the sanding, and the material often caught on the fine slivers. Between the sounds of Michael's hammer, the door opened. Little Mike turned, and Michael father, from his place on the chair, said, "Well, what's this?" "I'm Bob Faulkner," said the boy standing just inside the schoolroom. "Yes," said Michael, "that I could see from here." Little Mike could see that too. No Hutterian boy would ever wear a brown striped shirt and a red bow tie and neat-fitting pants. Robert's shoes were brown and so shiny that they looked as if their wearer had just walked through wet grass. Flung carelessly over his right shoulder was a light leather jacket. Little Mike absorbed all of this in one quick glance and noticed the neatly combed hair that looked freshly cut and fragrant. He realized that the newcomer was looking at him with eyes that were friendly. "Are you Mike Newman?" he asked. Little Mike started to reply, but his father was saying, "We're both Mike, so maybe you'd better make some designation." Robert caught a note of good humor in Michael's tone. "I mean Little Mike," he said. "Can he come out with me?" "Don't you boys in the world ever have to work?" Michael asked, pounding in a nail. "Sure we do. I work all the time. Know something? I'm a ticket boy in the grain pit." "What do you do?" Michael quipped. "Put tickets on the grain so that the city folks can tell which is wheat and which is rye." "Nothing like that," Robert explained. "There's no grain in the grain pit. That's just where they buy and sell grain, that's all. I carried the tickets from the phone men to the buyers." Michael moved his chair to the last window. "You see," Robert went on, "I work only during summer vacation. Course I'm not working now because I'm up here with Dad. Vacation's just about over anyway." He tossed his jacket aside and sat down on top of a school desk. "I sure make good money. Don't sit on that or I'll have a broken desk top to fix, Michael told him. About $3 a day with tips counted in. Robert went on, moving himself from the desk top to the seat. That's the way Dad got started. Ticket boy. Worked his way up. I buy just about all my own stuff that way. Bought this wristwatch. No, Dad gave me that. Bought this knife on this chain, though. Ever see one like it? Look, all you do is press this snap and out comes the blade. Press the snap, in she goes. Michael looked down at the demonstration, hammer in hand. Sarah peered at it over her work. Little Mike stood in wonder, suppressing his desire to speak. It was thrilling to see the tiny sharp blade leap out and then leap back. It was fascinating to catch a glimpse of Robert's wrist watch peeping out from under the cuff of his spotlessly clean shirt. But his sorrow was very real when he remembered that he, too, had recently possessed a personal belonging and a thing of beauty. These are all very pretty, Robert Volkner, his heart was saying, but just wait until I find my harmonica. Then you will see something. Of course you have one too, but is it as lovely as mine? Does it have the songs in it that mine has? What's a knife like that good for? Michael asked. Good for lots of things. I'm always using it. In my work, Michael shrugged. It would last about 2 minutes. It's not even strong enough to peel potatoes. Betcha I can carve my initials right in the top of this desk, Robert threatened, grabbing the knife in his fist. You wait a minute, Michael shouted. I was just kidding, Robert laughed, and he snapped the knife back into its sheath. Kidding, I guess, Michael scolded. Looks to me like you need a little discipline. That's what it looks like to me. Say, Mr. Newman, Robert said, do you mind if Mike goes along? Michael made believe he did not hear. Along where? Asked little Mike. Yankton, said Robert. Yankton, echoed Sarah. You hear that, Michael? I hear the world, said Michael in a voice that was doomful. Then he leveled his eye against the brackets. Such talk is ridiculous. But little Mike was saying, in your automobile, would you like to? Robert asked. That's not the question, Michael said sharply. Don't you have anything better to do than to run around and burn up gasoline? But Robert insisted. We've got to get my grandmother. Grandmother, said Sarah. You mean your mother. No, grandmother, Dad's mom. You better get your relationship straightened out, Michael told him. Your father's mother happens to be in a Canadian colony. Okay, said Robert, so she is, and she's coming here. She's coming down from the Upper Prairie colony, and we're meeting her in Yankton. Michael turned to Sarah in bewilderment. Do you suppose that could be? He asked in an undertone. She's coming for the wedding, Robert was saying. Dad spoke to the minister up there on the phone. Come on along, Mike. You say she is coming to see Rachel get married. Sarah marveled. Well, of course, she's coming to see Dad. Robert explained. He's written to her lots of times, and telephoned her, and now she's coming. That I have to see, Michael blustered. Our women don't waste their time riding on railroads. Oh well, Sarah said, seeking to conceal her eagerness. You know, Michael, the Canadian colonies have always been more progressive. It can well be that Martha Volkner will come. Nonsense, Michael told her, taking out his disgust on the last nail in the last window bracket. Don't give me the impression that the colonies are getting modernized. Upper Prairie has running water, Sarah submitted, and electric lights. That doesn't mean that Grandmother Volkner is coming. Anyhow, since when does a man have to take what a child says for truth? He jumped down from the chair. "It's the truth all right, Mr. Newman," Robert told him. "You just ask Dad." But Michael had started for the door. There he was, almost run down by Rachel, and 3 girls bursting into the room. "Watch your manners," Michael scolded. "Sarah, mother," Rachel cried happily. "Did you hear the news? Martha Volkner will be here for the wedding. She's coming on the train. The householder thinks she got permission, because she belongs to the colony that will move down here when we buy the Jordan Ranch." Michael went out, slamming the door. "Let's scram," Robert whispered to Mike, and while the girls were lost in comments on the curtains and the prospect of the coming of the Canadian visitor, the boys slipped out into the yard. "Why can't you come with us to town, Mike?" Robert asked. "Because we just don't go, that's all," Mike shrugged. "But why don't you?" "Rules." "But why the rules?" "I don't know," Mike faltered. "If I go, that means Jake and Dan should go too. We'll take them, and Paul and Matt and Joey and all the rest. We'll take as many as we can this time, and some other time we'll take the others. Come on, I've got comic books, a whole stack of 'em." They were crossing the commune road, walking along the way where Mike could not go without anxiously searching the ground. Under the spell of this seeking and Robert's enthusiasm about getting permission to make the trip, Mike heard himself say, "I could play the harmonica all the way to Yankton." "You got a harmonica?" Mike shook his head. "No, I haven't. Not now. Dad gave me one. I didn't bring it along. Never could play much on the thing. If you've got one, bring it along. We'll sit in the back, and Sis can sit up front with Dad." Sorrowfully, Mike turned in the direction of the meadow. He did not want to walk to the high bank, for that would mean looking for the instrument all the way, and it did not seem right to have a stranger along when he did that. But when he thought about it, he had to admit that Robert did not seem like an outsider. It was pleasant being with him. He had a frankness that invited trust. Robert was swinging his leather jacket in his hand. "I ought to ditch this thing," he said. "It's chilly, but you're even barefooted. I go barefooted when we go to the beach. Wish you could see the lake, Mike, Lake Michigan. If they'll let you go to Yankton, maybe they'll let you go to Chicago with me." "Do you think they would? I'd take you down to the grain pit. Did you ever see a ball game? Dad and I go lots of times. You know what? We've got a television set at home. If we didn't want to go to the game, we could sit right in our living room and see it anyhow. I've got a radio, just a cheap one, bought it myself to carry around with me. Tell you something else. We could go to the amusement park and have a swell time. They've got all kinds of stuff there. Roller coasters, merry-go-rounds, crack-the-whips, Ferris wheels." The wheat along the edge of the meadow shared Mike's thoughts. Longingly it looked down at the meadow road. It was caught. Its roots were holding it. Some day soon the reapers would come, but the wheat stems would still be left there. The roots would be left too, and the bare, sharp, headless stems would be standing. "Let's walk through, Mike," Mind, there was no rule against that. Nobody had ever said, "Don't walk through the wheat field," because no one made a practice of that. Doesn't it hurt your feet, Mike? No. Why go barefoot all the time? Most of the time. Pretty soon I'll put on shoes when it gets cold. Dad said that shoes are made right here in the colony. That's handy. Dad said in the olden days, long ago, they sometimes made the shoes straight so they could be worn on either foot. Hey, is that the mill? Let's take a look around. Will they mind? Neither the mill boss nor his helper gave the boys a second glance. The miller's beard and bushy eyebrows were white with flour dust. His strong arms hugged the flour sacks as he lifted them from the chute and set them down for his helper to sew them shut with the long needle. The dull thunder of the giant hoppers and the rattle of the old machinery shook the building. Mike led his companion across the rickety flooring with its open hatches to the worn and slippery stairs. Together they climbed to the tiny window that looked down on the big wheel, turning and stirring up the water of the Missouri. Mike took the end of his shirt and wiped the thick dust from the 4 small panes. Amid the noise and rumble, he pointed out the deep holes of the river and drew attention to the chalk quarries on the other bank. The morsels of knowledge which he had gathered from his father and colony talk became storehouses of wisdom. The chalk is so soft it can be cut with a saw, but afterward it gets very hard. There's where the men set the fish nets in the fall. Over there, Michael Father has the power saw for cutting wood. That runs with gasoline. If the sun was shining, you could see things plain. All that's in Nebraska. We're in South Dakota, but just over the river is another state. Robert was impressed. The attic window and the heavy beams, the low, dull roar, and the pulsing rafters gave him a sense of adventure. It's a storybook place, he told Mike, and forgetting about his clean clothes, he followed the colony boy through a precarious passage in the loft that led past the heavy, moving leather belts. When they got back to the mill road, Robert brushed himself and tore off his necktie. "The heck with it," he said, stuffing it into his pocket. "Mom's not along, and Dad won't care. Know what? I've got a good notion to take off my shoes." "Take them off," Mike told him. "We can go through the vogelfod that's smooth." "Okay," Robert agreed, and started to untie his shoes. "My zipper jacket," he exclaimed. "I left it at the mill." "I'll get it," Mike told him. He went back and found it hanging on a post. He picked it up and looked at it. The lining was a soft shade of red. The jacket was brown, with texture soft and smooth, and down the front was a metal strip that looked like a series of closely fastened hooks and eyes. "My zipper jacket," Mike repeated, caressing it and walking slowly back. "Put it on, Mike," Robert called. He was rolling up his pants legs and looking every moment more like a boy of the colony. "Put it on and zipper up." Mike slipped an arm into the sleeve. The touch of the soft material, the richness of possession, the ecstasy of becoming for a moment a worldling, in fact, rushed into his mind. He put it on. "Here, I'll zip it up for you." The hooks and eyes were not Huterian. The zipper closed the jacket as swiftly as the closing of a trap. Mike was caught caught in the magnificent attire of a boy of the world. The jacket closed up securely all the way to his chin, and the excitement took away his breath. "Gee whiz, this path is hard on my feet," said Robert. Mike scarcely heard. He was turning up the collar of the jacket as he started toward the Vogelfod. Here the birds were singing, as they always did, but under the kingly vestment his heart was singing evermore. He was Daniel clothed with a princely gown. He was the prodigal, and the best robe had been put on him. He was Elisha, upon whom had fallen Elijah's dazzling mantle. Now he was leading Robert up the soft carpet of grass that led to the high bank. How snug and warm he felt! How conscious he was of a happiness that he had not known since the last time he held the harmonica in his hands. Even Pastor Kunz, in his Sunday vest, could not have felt the joy of leadership which he felt now. Robert was talking about the fun they would have when he took Mike through the crowded streets, and how different that would be. Had he never seen a movie, had he never been to a theater, Robert would take him to a carnival where he could hear a calliope and listen to the carnival music. In his secret soul, Mike was content with the dazzlement of the moment. Though the air he breathed was commune air, there was a strange, enticing scent about it that he had never felt before. As they climbed to the top of the high bank, a figure peered out of the grass. Joey sprang into the air to see. Who was coming? "Mike!" he shrieked. "Jake, look at Mike!" Jake sat up. "It's Mike's face," he exclaimed, "and Mike's legs all right." "It's Mike," said Robert, "all zipped up." "It's Robert Faulkner's jacket," Mike explained. Joey was at Mike's side, eagerly inspecting the jacket. "It's soft as a goose's back," he said. "How's it fasten?" "Look," said Mike, "it zips." He pulled the zipper slowly, and as the jacket opened, Joey's eyes popped. "Do it again, Mike," he cried. Robert said, "Didn't you ever see it?" "Look it, I got one here too." Robert opened and shut the zipper on his pants. Joey screamed with delight. "Let me do it," he pleaded. "Okay," said Robert. Joey pulled the zipper down and up and then rolled in the damp grass in glee. "Is that ever handy, Mike?" he cried in a fit of pleasure. "That we all ought to have." Robert caught sight of something lying in the grass. "What's this?" he asked, walking over to it. "A catfish." "We grubbed him up with the rake," Joey explained. "Were you raking the river again, Jake?" Mike asked. "Did you find anything?" Jake shook his head. "Nothing. Only the catfish," said Joey. "There it is, still wriggling." "Must be a 2-pounder, Robert observed. While he and Joey bent over it, Jake said, "I guess we must give up now. Mike, as far as the river goes. I went over every inch as far as I could." Mike took off the zipper jacket. As he laid it on the grass, he wished with all his soul that he had come to help Jake, instead of enjoying himself with Robert Faulkner's company. The burden of the instrument returned to him. The knowledge that Jake had worked untiringly accused and shamed him. "I'll look from now on, Jake," he said. "You go with Robert Faulkner, of course. You can't go where he wants us to go, to Yankton." "To Yankton," Jake replied eagerly. "In the automobile." "No, that we can't do." "Look here," Joey hollered. "Look what's happening." Robert had pulled the gold chain from his pocket and was kneeling over the fish. "I told Joey I could kill Mr. Catfish with a straw," he said. "Want to see how?" Joey insisted he did, and Robert put the tip of the knife blade against the center of the flat, gray head. He punctured the skin. Now we take a straw, he demonstrated, and push it down into the hole. See how easy it goes. It strikes the spine, and look. The straw is in almost all the way. The wriggling stops. There you see, the fish is dead. The boys bent over the terrible mystery. Solemnly, Mike looked at the fish lying motionless in the grass. There was some frightful learning behind the skill that killed the catfish. There was world learning in that. Robert Faulkner seemed to sense what Mike was thinking. Soberly, he put his knife away. Mike, looking down, spoke almost to himself. In the Bible is a story of how Peter needed money to pay his taxes. In the first fish he caught, there was the tax money in its mouth. Jake, how wonderful it would have been if there had been something in this fish's mouth for me. I know what you mean, Joey cried, and he told Mike with a glance that all the day needed was just that, the harmonica in the mouth of the catfish. Joey seized the fish and pried open the jaws. Just gills, he reported. Things don't happen like they did in the Bible times, said Jake. Maybe we shouldn't have killed it, Robert confessed, especially when we aren't going to eat it. The pigs will eat it, said Joey, jumping up. Here, inside my shirt, he goes, and I'll toss him over the pig fence. To the delight of all, Joey slapped the wet and slimy catfish against his body and pulled his shirt over it. Follow the catfish belly, he cried. I'm the hog boss. Robert laughed aloud as Joey swaggered off, shoulders back, stomach out, prancing off in the direction of the sheds. Robert snapped his fingers. I promised Dad I'd clean up the car before we went to town. Want to help me? You go with him, Jake, Mike told him. I'll come later. Okay, said Robert. I'll leave my shoes and the jacket. We'll be back. Mike watched them until they were well on their way past the big barn. Joey joined them there. Mike was alone, and for this he was grateful. Something told him that he would find the harmonica if he looked for it alone with no one to help or hope for him. To be alone was almost impossible in the communal system, and now that he was by himself on the high hill, it was like unlocking his heart and examining all thoughts and plans without fear of intrusion. For once there were no curtainless windows through which anyone could watch. There were no voices, no sound of a step, no clang of the commune bell, just the indescribable and wondrously hopeful feeling breaking through the pain of the lost instrument. His pocket was empty. He had nothing, no watch, no gold chain, no necktie, but just now he felt that the great eye could not look down on him without tenderness. The rake, little Mike the rake. He fell upon the worn gray handle, sprang to his feet, and began hacking at the long, tangled growth. The matted grass clogged the prongs. He cleaned them hastily, gathering the loose grass together. He piled it close to the overhanging edge. System he would have. He would rake through every inch from the brink to the gravelled barnyard, if need be. He would stack the loose grass together in orderly heaps. The harmonica was not in the river, not in the stove, nor underneath the schoolhouse steps, nor anywhere along the way. It must be here, somewhere close to him on the high bank. It was hiding and beckoning to be found. Rake, little Mike, rake. The hopeful moments passed into tremulous suspense. The raking went on feverishly. Questioning of heaven's concern tormented him. In the ebb and flow of faith and fear he combed and searched the ground, while memory verses haunted him. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hid in a field. When a man has found it, he hides it, and for joy therefore goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. And what woman, having 10 pieces of silver, if she loses one piece, does not light a candle and sweep the house, and will not stop seeking until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls her friends, and her neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, I have found that which was lost." Who would have believed there were so many small stones under the grass? Here a piece of wood, a strip just right for the Ferris wheel seat, a piece of wire, good for hanging it from the cross bar. Here dried feathers, quail feathers, dried bones where a hawk had been, tiny flowers, moldy and damp, pieces of straw long enough and stiff enough to kill a net full of catfish, a rusty washer, old and brittle, a grub worm and grass. Rake, little Mike, rake. And James the teacher said, "All together now, children. God rules in the kingdom of men, and gives it to whomever he wills. Remember Nebuchadnezzar. He thought he had great possessions, and he prided himself upon them, but he was driven from the sight of men, and did eat grass with the oxen, and his hair was wet with the dew of heaven." Did Nebuchadnezzar ever look up out of his suffering and hear music? Did he ever stand with the dew of heaven on his brow and hear singing? Suddenly the air was filled with melodies around little Mike. It was the sound of many harmonicas, a calip carnival music. He stood transfigured on the high bank with the heaped up grass around him, and in one earth-shattering moment he interpreted the music as a heavenly sign. Marveling, he looked to the sky. Now a chorus of many voices mingled with the instruments. "Listen," he breathed, and his heart stood still. The melody floated between heaven and earth. The sweetness was indescribable. This was the proof for everything he had learned and memorized and believed. The music soared and sang and covered the high bank with beauty and enchantment. Here was the miracle. Surely a voice would say, "Come, little Mike, come along. I will lead you to where the harmonica is waiting." There was a voice, quite close. It said, "Mike, look. Here is where the sweet sound is coming from." Jake stood on the slope of the high bank. Beside him was Robert Volkner, casually holding a small leather box. Robert turned a knob. The music stopped and a man's voice spoke. Then there was laughter in the box. "It's a radio," Jake explained. "You remember how the town man told us he heard one often." Mike let the rake fall to the ground. Robert said, "There, that's Chicago. Popular music. Mom doesn't like it, but Sis does. Now I'll get Denver." "The music and voices go all over the whole country," Jake informed. "Everyone who has a box like this can hear everything, no matter where he is. There, that's Denver. That's a news report. Think of that, Mike. It would be as if we sang the great song, and the colonies in Canada and England and even in Paraguay would hear our singing, just as if they would be sitting with us and singing along. This is a great thing. This is greater than Mike. Where are you going? Why are you walking away?" "Gee whiz," Robert cried. picking up his jacket and his shoes. I'm the one who has to beat it. Do you hear that? Sis is honking the car horn. Snap went the cover of the box. Gone were the voices and the music. Gone was the miracle. In the commune yard, the silence was broken by the incessant blaring of the horn. Mike walked sadly toward the river flats. Jake caught up with him. Mikey pleaded, "Tell me you found it." "No." "Then we must look some more. The rake is the way to do it." "The rake is good," Mike admitted, in a choking voice. He thrust his hands into his pockets to brace himself against the disillusionment he felt. "Let's go back and hunt," Jake urged. "The harmonica won't find itself." "No, it will not find itself, but I'm for going to the Sheep Hill. Why, I don't know." They walked together. Jake opened the collar of his shirt. "You know," he said, "I like Robert Faulkner. He didn't say even a word about the bump on my neck. That was good of him. It was good of him to let us hear the radio. No one else heard it. Mike, not even Joey or anyone, because Joshua Volkner told him not to play it. To think of what the little box can do. Who can explain that? Not even Jacob father or your father can make a box like that." Mike walked on, never lifting his eyes from the ground. Finally he said, "The music was like the angel's song. The singing that came from the box was the loveliest I ever heard. And all Robert had to do was turn a little knob. What do you think, Jake? How can the world be such an awful place and still have things so wonderful?" "That," said Jake thoughtfully, "is a big question." Chapter 10. Church time was over. The men filed out the schoolhouse, deepening the dusk of the commune with their black attire. The children sprang down the wooden steps without speaking. Then came the women, with their hands rolled in their dark-colored aprons. No one spoke, remembering a tradition that called for silence until 20 paces from the place of prayer. Even David Weiss and Rachel Newman did not walk together. It was always a matter of each one going alone so that the words of the sermon could be reviewed. After all were out, Pastor Kunz closed the door, tucked the large Bible under his arm, and moved with peremptory step in the direction of his home. Soon the house benches were occupied by motionless figures silhouetted against the unlighted homes. Children played in the sandy yard. 3 chore men walked to the barns to make their final inspection for the night. Everywhere eyes watched the commune gate. Everywhere there was a sense of listening for the sound of a car which might turn off the highway and into the commune road, the whine of a horse in the stables, the faint melodious note of a sheep bell, the cackling of the geese, the flutter of the wind, the closing of a door, were sounds consulting together about the uncommon waiting as darkness descended. A lamp was lighted in the Newman home. Sarah turned up the wick. Michael, who was slouched comfortably on the house bench outside, turned his head. "Why do you light up already?" he called. "Do you think Joshua Volkner will bring his mother here first thing? I know they went to Yankton to meet the train, but I still have to be shown that she's coming at all." "Who is thinking of the Volkners?" came the reply. "Rachel is having the girls come over in a few minutes." "The girls? Why?" "Why?" Sarah echoed. "Isn't it a custom before the big day?" "What big day?" He heard Sarah groan in disgust and noted the sound of chairs being pushed across the floor in preparation for the girls' visit. "What big day?" he repeated. Little Mike, who sat on the ground in the dark area at the edge of the bench, said, "The wedding of Sister Rachel and David Weiss, Michael father." Sarah came out of the house with her knitting pail and dropped to the bench. Straining her eyes over the yarn, she vented her exasperation on the needles. "What big day?" she mimicked. Michael chuckled. "What am I supposed to do? Pass out cigars?" "Cigars don't go with weddings," she told him. "They go with babies." "Well, Miss Newman," he quipped, "have you got some outside information about how things are done in the world?" "Anybody knows that," Sarah shrugged. "Did you know that, little Mike?" Michael wanted to know. "Know what, Michael father?" "Know what?" Michael said in make-believe scorn. "What's the matter with you? When a man speaks, listen." "Yes, Michael father." Michael dangled his hat between his knees. Then he called to a cluster of children playing on the dark ground of the commune. "Anna, put Mary to bed. It's time you go too. Stay out there and you'll get run over with an automobile, the way things are going around here. That black car always reminds me of a behemoth, ready to swallow everybody up." The children obeyed. Sarah continued her knitting. "Yes," she said casually, "the Volkner automobile should come soon, but Joshua will park it at the schoolhouse." Michael did not hear. Just for amusement's sake, he said reflectively, "Let's follow this matter through. How do you know that cigar giving is for babies coming?" Sarah moved impatiently. "Who knows where we find out lots of things? Maybe the birds bring us the information." Michael looked out into the dark. "Seriously," he said, "it's not only this information, it's many kinds. And it's not only you, it's me too. I sometimes get things in my mind, and I can't for the life of me remember how or where I got them. Things of the world, I mean, and information about the world, and it's getting more that way all the time. How do such things get through the gate? How do they get through the fence and into us? That's what I'd like to know. Take the matter of the Ferris wheel seats." And as little Mike listened with sudden interest, his father went on, "I said that I saw such a wheel in Omaha one time, but the more I thought about it, the more I wondered if I ever had seen one. So this morning I asked the town man, did we see a wheel like that when we were in Omaha? "Never," he said. "I never saw one, and neither did you." Of course he may be wrong, but the more I think of it, the more I don't believe I did see a wheel there. All right, where did I see one? Where did I learn about it? How do these things happen?" "Foolish talk," said Sarah, but her voice was warm, and little Mike knew that she was as happy to hear his father speak as he was. He wriggled closer to the house bench until his body snuggled against it and the wall. Here in the dark he sat securely, and when Michael laid his hat on the bench, little Mike took the hat and put it on. It covered his ears and his eyes, and made him feel completely concealed from everyone and everything. Beneath it he guarded the thoughts of his great loss. Now he could contemplate his misfortune without fear of being found out, and he could sorrow without being asked the reason. He could also contemplate the words his father had spoken. How did the voice of the world come in? He heard happy, excited cries, and hurrying steps in the commune yard. Rachel and Ruth and a group of girls were on their way to the house to admire the things in Rachel's marriage chest. They gathered around the house bench, all talking at once. "Thank you for lighting the lamp, Sarah Mother," Rachel said. "There are 12 of us here already. Now don't let David come near." "Then don't make so much noise," Michael advised. "When the hen cackles, everybody knows where she has her nest." "We would all cackle, Michael Newman," said Rebecca Mueller, "if it was our wedding day tomorrow." "Nobody is stopping you," Michael answered. "Consult this Stammbaum and get busy." "Hurry and tell the boys to grow up," Rachel laughed roguishly. "We were just saying that marriageable agers are scarce." "I suppose," Michael observed wryly, "that's why the good Lord sees fit to bring a Canadian colony down here pretty soon." "An idea, girls!" exclaimed Rebecca Mueller, who was 2 years older than Rachel. "That's where I will find me one." "Is the colony really coming?" Ruth asked. "Of course it's coming," Michael assured her, "but will it be close enough to our colony for us to meet the boys?" came the question. "Didn't you hear?" exclaimed Rachel. "The elders are going to arrange for the new colony to settle on the Jordan Ranch. That's only 6 miles." Ruth exclaimed, "But to go 6 miles, we must get permission, Michael Father." "For that we'll get permission unless the elders want us all to be old maids." "Old maids, that's something one doesn't see in a Hutterian colony." "I think we should be allowed to travel." "Travel?" Michael's voice broke in. "Just don't serve that kind of wine at tomorrow's wedding. We mean travel to the other colonies, so that we may look around a little." "Look around for marriageables?" "Yes, the rules should be less strict so that we can do that." "Please, Newman Michael," pleaded Rebecca Mueller, "when you go to fix the buildings at the Jordan Ranch, let me go along and bring the lunch to the workers. Then when a nice Canadian boy sees me—" "He goes straight back to Alberta," grunted Michael. "Oh no," Rebecca insisted amid the laughter. "They all want to be Americans, and what better way is there to be an American than to marry one?" "Just be a good Hutterian," said Michael. "America needs us as bad as we need America. Don't forget that we are the only ones in the whole country living the true Christian communal life. That's a responsibility. First, be a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. The rest is secondary." "Let's go in, girls," said Rachel. "Here come the others. Come in, all come in." "Say, Rebecca," a girl said, laughing, "what you should have is an automobile. Then you could visit all the Canadian colonies quick." "What I should have is an airplane. Then I could just look down and see how the men suit me." Little Mike heard his father sigh. The sound seemed louder than the voices of the girls as they hurried into the room. It was as sad as the night was for little Mike. In it there was no make-believe, no desire for any special effect, no request for pity. It was an expression of honest pain. Now Michael was saying, "Another generation, another problem. I tell you, Sarah, it's good Rachel is getting someone like David Weiss. He knows what is the right way, and when the children start coming, she will stop looking out at the world." Rachel never looked at the world, Sarah reminded him, any more than any of us did. Michael did not hear. "For that matter," he was saying, I guess all young people go through a time when they want more liberty than is good for them. They wonder how wise the fathers were in making rules and regulations." Sarah's voice was far away. "Yes, there are such times." But Michael went on. "The danger passes. Age brings wisdom. There comes a time when we are glad we are not Joshua Volkners, roaming in the world homeless, godless, and forsaken." But he added in a troubled voice, "Even though we go through times of doubt and come to our senses, the next generation finds it a little harder, and the next a little harder still. Every Tutarian generation moves closer to the world, it seems to me. It's good Joshua is not under the bench to hear me say that. He thinks we ought to tear down the fences and make short work of it. That's because he has lost the spirit and serves the flesh. Thank God that for every one like him there are a few thousand like me, and for every one like his Robert there are a few thousand like little Mike. Isn't that right, little Mike?" Church time was over long ago, Sarah said as the knitting needles suddenly flew. "Must we have the sermon all over again?" Michael clamped his hands on his knees. "I just wanted to ask," he demanded with spirit, "if anybody in the Newman household had any idea how things get into a person's mind. That was what I started talking about before these man-hunters came along. How did the Ferris wheel get into me if I never saw one? Old Daniel the teacher told us once that if a boy was kept away from everybody and everything, he would still learn to swear. Figure that one out for me. Where does that come from? That's the question, and when we have answered it, then we know how the world gets into the commune." Little Mike snatched the hat from his head with an impulse and sprang to his feet. "I can tell you that, Michael father." "All right, Pastor Newman, you tell us," Michael ordered. "I heard things come through the gate and over the fences today," little Mike said excitedly. "I heard music and people talking, and they weren't in the commune at all. They were in Chicago and Denver and in other cities all over the whole country, but they were on the high bank as plain as we hear Rachel and the girls, plainer even, all because Robert Volkner had a little box that he opened. He opened it, and it caught the music and the voices out of the air and brought them to us so that Jake and I could hear them. You see, Michael father, the fence could not stop them, and the gate did not hold them back, even if it was closed and our river just let them come through. As the Red Sea stood aside and let the Israelites come through, Michael said harshly, "Like that," little Mike continued breathlessly. "Nothing could stop the voices and the music. They were beautiful, but they were sad sometimes too, and Jake said that Robert told him there were always voices and music all around us. Right, in the commune, night or day, it doesn't matter. Even in the houses, with the doors and the windows closed. There the voices and the music come in. Even in the vegetable cellar, which is under the ground. There they are. They're in the schoolhouse at church time, while Pastor Cons is speaking, and while we're praying on our knees they come in. We can always hear the world. All we need is the box. And I said to Jake that maybe we didn't need even the box. Maybe if we just listened real hard sometimes when things are very quiet. Mike." His father's word struck him like a stinging blow. Little Mike was plunged headlong out of the rapture to which he had climbed. He stood in the darkness, stunned and trembling. Blindly he looked at the two figures darkly outlined on the bench. His mother sat with her hands folded in her lap. His father fiercely gripped the edge of the bench, eyes groping to study the face of his son. Then Michael Newman lifted a hand from the house bench and held it out. Firmly he said, "Come here, little Mike, come here to me." Little Mike moved forward. He did not give his father his hand. He let him take hold of his bare arm, and the strong fingers pierced into the flesh. He felt himself drawn to the bench, and his father's arm suddenly went around him gently, and his father's bearded face touched his cheek. "Let me tell you something, my son," Michael whispered, and his voice was hushed and compassionate. "Never open the box. Then all the voices in the world can never touch you. But open your heart, and you will hear something that even Robert Faulkner's wonderful instrument has never heard." So saying, he drew little Mike close to him. All that had been pain was warmth and healing. The hurt was gone. Little Mike felt that there could never be any other world than this, no other security, no other home. "A radio," Sarah exclaimed distastefully. "That would be the last thing I would want drumming in my ears." "Did you ever hear one, Michael father?" little Mike asked. "Of course," said Michael in a thoughtful voice. "Of course I did, many times." "Where, I'd like to know?" Sarah asked with a gentle ring of doubt in her voice. "I heard one in Omaha that time," Michael said uncertainly. Then he released little Mike. Sarah's needles paused. Far away a light flashed over the hedges. It moved through the distant acres, cutting a silver furrow in the commune road. It came quickly and insolently to the commune gate. Then it crawled into the main yard, blinding anyone who sought to meet its searching glare. It was a behemoth, taking all that it saw with its eyes and piercing through every snare with its nose. It was a behemoth, and it lay under the trees in the covert of the reed and fens, then closed its eyes and let night hide it with its shadow. Little Mike followed his father and mother to the car. As the families came from their homes to greet Martha Faulkner, the rule against going close to the car was disregarded. Children crowded around it while the men and women kissed and embraced the Canadian visitor. "I'll bring your luggage, Mother," Joshua told her. "Luggage," said the old woman with a cry. "The paper sack, that is all. What should a person bring when she comes home?" "Yes, yes, it is home. I don't need that lantern, Weiss Caleb. Here comes Pastor Kunz," was the excited announcement. "Welcome, welcome, Mother Israel," said the pastor, striding forward and shaking her hand with both of his. "And how did you leave the good brethren in Canada?" "Look me over," said Martha. "Maybe they are still hanging to my skirts." "How are they, Pastor Jacob? How is anyone who stands looking across to the promised land? Are you the only one they sent to spy it out?" Michael asked with spirit. "Then tell them it's flowing with milk and honey." Pastor Kunz warned that the promised land meant work, and Martha Faulkner replied that the people in her colony were ready for it, 200 strong. In the light of the householder's lantern, little Mike had a chance to see the mother of Joshua Faulkner. She was a strong, plump woman with glossy pink cheeks that were tucked into the folds of her polka-dot headscarf. Her eyes were sharp and bold, like two brown birds ready for flight. Over the shoulders of her full black dress, she wore a wide, dark, knitted scarf that hung almost to her knees. Her apron was deep blue and reached to the tip of her heavy homemade shoes. She brushed aside the exclamations of enthusiastic welcome. As the children clung to her, she picked one up and said, "You're one of Daniel Muller's. Yes, that anyone can see. And you there, you belong to the Kunz household." "Good," said the pastor, "but when the sheep get out of the fold and feed in our other pastures, then what?" He turned heavily and looked in Joshua's direction, where Robert and Elaine stood at their father's side. "To a mother," said Martha Volkner, steadfastly, "a child is known no matter in which world he makes his home." "Known he might be," exclaimed Pastor Kunz, "but out of the household is out of the life." "Tonight, Pastor Kunz," Joshua said cordially, "we are all one family." There was a stirring in the circle of welcomers. An opening formed, and Selma Kunz came shuffling through with the aid of her cane. "Yes, yes," she murmured as Martha greeted her with an affectionate cry. "Rheumatism and all comes to say, 'Welcome home, Martha Volkner, welcome home.'" "Rheumatism or not, you look wonderful to me, Selma Kunz," said the other as she embraced the pastor's wife. "You're good enough to go back to Canada with me for a visit." "You just come back here," Selma implored. "We have enough for everybody. First, we three go to the wedding meeting," Sarah Newman invited, slipping an arm into Martha's and offering her hand to Selma Kunz. Sarah ushered them out of the crowd as hurriedly as she dared, while the children clustered around and accompanied them across the commune yard. Little Mike ran ahead, followed by Jake Linder and Robert Volkner. "You know something," Robert said as they hastened toward the Newman house. "She's a great guy." Little Mike stopped and looked at Jake blankly. Then he turned to Robert. "Did she like the car ride?" "She didn't say." "Did you show her the radio?" "She wasn't interested." They dashed into the house where Rachel stood in her engagement dress, showing it off to the group of girls. The room was noisy and gay. The table, which usually stood in the center of the room, was shoved aside, and in its place was the marriage chest. The top was up, and on it were draped some linen pieces. So engrossed were the girls in their animated comments that they paid no attention to the boys, who sat down, 3 on a chair. In a moment a crowd of women pressed into the room, close on the heels of Sarah Newman and her companions. The children were ordered to stay outside. Grandmother Volkner stopped the girls. Excited chatter. "Talk, talk, talk," she greeted them. "I heard you girls long before I saw you. That's not in keeping with the rules as I learned them." Sarah was making Selma Kunz comfortable in a chair, and already drawing up another chair with her foot so that Martha Volkner would have a place. "Rachel," Sarah ordered, "come and greet Martha Volkner." Rachel flew into the elderly woman's arms. All right," Martha murmured. "Everybody gets married. Don't think you're the only one who has had a wedding meeting." "But no one has had anything so exciting," said Rachel happily. "You came all the way from Canada." "Let me look at you," said Grandmother Volkner, setting Rachel off at arm's length. "I see the proper headscarf all right, but what is this you're wearing?" "That's the engagement dress." Rachel was thrilled. "I'll describe it to you. It's silk print, but because the light is so bad with the lamp, you maybe can't see the green and white figures. The background is brown. Isn't the apron beautiful?" "That must all come to a dear price," Martha Volkner observed, as her hands caressed the material. "But then," she said shortly, "I hear that in America you need only plant money, and there is always a good crop." "Oh no, Grandmother Volkner," Rachel hastened to say. "This was all bought with my allowance money according to the rule." "Allowance money," said Martha suspiciously. "That is still 30 cents a month, isn't it? This material looks like allowance for 50 years. It's really very cheap, but it looks expensive." Little Mike got up and stood on the chair. This was against the regulations, but who was to say anything, since there were no men in the room to give the orders, and he wanted to look over the shoulders of the women, so that he might see Martha Volkner as she sat down in the chair which Sarah Mother had drawn up for her. There was a movement in the crowded doorway. Joshua Volkner came in carrying a long cardboard box. At his side was his daughter Elaine. "Where's the bride-to-be?" he asked. "Here, Rachel, this is for you." There was an awkward pause in the midst of a sudden silence. Rachel glanced beseechingly at her mother, then with sudden disregard for everything but her own feelings, she took the box from Joshua's hand. Impulsively she untied the large red ribbon and opened the gift. Her nervous hands touched the bouquet of red roses rapturously. "Thank you, Joshua Volkner, thank you," she said, as she pressed the roses to her breast. "How beautiful," Sarah began, but "Flowers," said Martha Volkner, in a tone of dismay. "That is not a custom with us, Joshua." "But what harm, Mother?" Joshua asked, while the room filled with exclamations. "If they bring Rachel some happiness, they'll go beautifully with your dress," Elaine observed. "They'll go even nicer with the wedding dress," said Rachel, scarcely daring to speak. "I can see tomorrow already." Rebecca was dreaming. "Pastor Kunz is saying, 'David Weiss and Rachel Newman, you will come forward and stand in front of me.' Rachel carrying the lovely roses, and David Weiss in his new black suit." "Don't say any more," Rachel exclaimed. "I get scared enough already with all that is happening. Sit close to the front in church, then you'll not have so far to walk," a girl suggested. Rachel laughed nervously. Elaine asked, "What's the wedding dress like?" The girls became louder and more talkative. "It must be a two-piece. The blouse must be lined. That's the custom. Is it silk, too? Is it blue, Rachel? Is it bright blue or just blue?" "Talk, talk, talk," interrupted Martha Volkner in a voice of disgust. She silenced everyone, but as they looked at her they saw that she was smiling. Little Mike saw Joshua Volkner smile too, and look at his mother with affection. "The prettiest wedding I ever saw was Michael Newman's and Sarah's," Martha Volkner reminisced. "There was no fuss and no noise, and no old woman from Canada to tell them how it ought to be done. They were married without any specially made clothes, and without anything from the outside world." "Things change in 20 years," said Sarah, with a wave of dismissal. "Let the young people do things in their own way. Come, Rachel, show Martha Volkner your apron." Rachel dipped into the marriage chest and brought out the apron. Grandmother Volkner touched it yearningly. The deep blue and the texture fascinated her, but she said haughtily, "Where did it come from?" "Yankton," said Rachel. "Isn't it beautiful? And see, here is my name, cross-stitched in brown and white." Grandmother Volkner said, "How dear was it?" $2 for the goods. After the wedding, what is it good for? For Sunday wear, and even for working when the working is not too dirty. You young ones have all the answers. If you could go through life with your tongues, you would all live to be Methuselahs. The girls laughed happily, but Grandmother shook a warning finger. "Just laugh," she warned. "We old ones have forgotten more than you young ones will ever know." "Where did you get your husband?" asked Rebecca Mueller. "Were there enough men in the colony to go around?" "Don't think so much about a husband," Sarah scolded in playful exasperation. "And one will come along." Amid the comments of agreement and laughter among the women, Martha Volkner said, "I was Rachel's age when one day another family came from Germany. There was Adrian Volkner." "How old was he?" asked one of the girls. 20 maybe. What does it matter? The pastor came to me and said, 'There is a nice man for you.'" "You let the pastor pick out your husband," cried Rebecca. "Why not?" Martha retorted. "The pastor was old and wise, and I was young and foolish. He knew best." "What was your wedding day like?" Rachel inquired. "Was it very happy?" "It was in spring," Martha said. "Adrian was helper to the farm boss. On our wedding day, instead of a big dinner, everyone in the community fasted. In those days, we had to save food for seed. Everything was planned in terms of what was best for the community. That was our life. You know the orchard where you pick apples. Adrian planted the first trees. You remember, don't you, Salma Kunz, how he once brought the apple blossoms into the church and decorated the table. They were pretty, too, and fragrant, but the pastor preached a sermon on waste and vanity. Well, that was right. Adrian said it was right. There was the time that—" She stopped distastefully. "Talk, talk, talk," she said. "It's pretty talk, grandmother," Elaine told her. Martha Volkner looked at her warmly, then withdrew her gaze and addressed herself to Rachel. "Tell me, Rachel Newman, how many petticoats are you wearing under that dress?" "Two." "Two? Where are the other two?" "Nobody wears 4 any more. In the world they don't wear any," Rebecca Mueller spoke up. "Do they, Elaine Volkner?" "I sometimes do, but that's with a party dress. When I'm dressed like now, I just wear—" "Well, Elaine," Joshua interrupted, amused, "you weren't asked to elaborate on what the world is wearing." "What don't they wear in the world?" Grandmother Volkner wanted to know. "What I saw on my trip I would never have believed. Sometimes I couldn't tell who was a man and who was a woman. They both smoked. They both wore long pants. They both drove automobiles. There was no difference that I could see. It's even worse than that, Mother," Joshua told her lightly. "In the world, women control most of the money, and most of them control most of us men. So you see, things are really in a bad way." "Well," Martha Volkner observed, "you know where things are better." "In the colonies?" Joshua asked. "Certainly, in the colonies," said a voice at the door, and Michael Newman forced his way into the room. "Where would you find more happiness or peace than right here?" "I heard you brought flowers, Joshua." "Yes, I see them. Flowers die like the things of the world. The commune is something that lives on. Why shouldn't it? It is the life that God designed for his true followers." Little Mike still stood with Robert on the chair. Together they watched the indomitable figure of Michael Newman take over the room. Prophetically, he stood near Martha Volkner's chair and rehearsed the wonders of commune life. The girls hesitated to move for fear of interrupting him. The knitting needles in the hands of the women clicked softly. Word by word, Michael transformed the room into a stronghold of Futarian faith. "Wait till the brethren come from Canada," Michael was saying. "We'll show the world how Futarian ideals can be transplanted without loss of the fruit." "Come to see us, then, Joshua Volkner." Come and visit your own relatives when they are safely settled on the Jordan Ranch." "The Jordan Ranch?" Joshua asked with a start. "What do you mean?" Michael answered with a sweep of his arms. "We're planning to buy the Jordan Ranch for our brethren. The elders decided that at their meeting. It's close to us, 6 miles. That shows how God provides for his people." "But the Jordan Ranch, Michael," Joshua said, with a look of pain in his eyes. "Didn't you know that was sold?" "Sold when? Who bought it?" "You didn't know?" Joshua asked incredulously. Then as Michael studied him, he added, "That goes to show what can happen where radios are forbidden and newspapers are scarce." "Who bought it?" Michael demanded. "The Central States Grain Company," Joshua told him. "Who is the Central States Grain Company?" Then Michael's eyes filled with alarm. "You mean your concern. You mean the big business you're in. You bought the Jordan Ranch from under our noses." "I wasn't aware of that," Joshua said. "We certainly had no idea that your colony would ever want it. We took it over 6 months ago. It was heavily mortgaged." "Well," conceded Michael, with a fling of his arms, "what does it matter? Now we will buy it from you, and maybe even for a better price than we could have got it before." Joshua shook his head. "I'm afraid," he said, "the Jordan Ranch is out of the question. We're converting that into an experimental farm, and our plans have gone so far." "You mean you would stand in our way, even where your own people are concerned?" "It isn't that," Joshua explained. "In fact, if it were mine, it would be different. But it's not mine, you see. It belongs to the corporation, and I am just one of the members." "I thought you owned it," Michael said accusingly. "Hardly. This is not a case of private ownership at all. And that's why I don't have too much to say. This is a corporation, and many people have interest in it. No one man has the control. There are stockholders and directors and advisors." "That sounds like a complicated worldly business," Michael told him wryly. "Not much more complicated than a colony system, Michael. In a way, it is like a communal enterprise, except that people share according to their investment, and most men get their positions according to their ability. But that's something like colony life too. I suppose you get out of it what you put into it, and a man becomes a carpenter, shall we say, because he's the best man for that job. So it is in a business like ours. But this is the difference, Michael. We've found our work within the American way itself. We have no fences. We have not isolated ourselves. We know what the system of the world is like, and we admit that there are many things in it which should be changed and improved. That's part of our job, and if at times the changes are slow or do not seem effective, we at least feel that we are trying. We know that our future is in our hands, and we must make it the best we can. Since the world can never go back, we must fit the good life into the system and not try to fit an outmoded system to the life." The room lay hushed as Joshua finished, not because of what he had said. Few understood that, but because his voice was as sincere as that of Pastor Kuhn's in the midst of a sermon. The women waited with their knitting idle in their hands. Rachel and the girls seemed to have forgotten about the wedding. Martha Volkner sat with folded hands and looked up at Joshua, her lips moving without speaking. Little Mike gazed at his father. For once Michael Newman had nothing to say. His arms dropped, his eyes were perplexed, as if he was trying desperately to understand. how Joshua had admitted him by a new door into the world. He seemed to be saying, "You see, Joshua, when you compare something with colony life, that I can understand, that I know backward and forward, but where we were right and wrong in this picture, how could the world's interest have got in ahead of God's people?" Michael had felt a deadly thrust come through the impenetrable commune faith that had always sustained him. He felt the eyes of everyone on him, and the room was waiting for him to speak. He looked at Joshua defiantly. "We mean to get the Jordan Ranch," he vowed. "It's made exactly for our requirements, but if things are as you say, the sooner the elders know about it, the better." He swung around, the women made room for him, and he went out. Little Mike jumped down from the chair, trailed by Robert Volkner and Jake Linder. He made his way to the door. Men were gathered near the house. Others stood in little groups in the commune yard. But a hurrying shadow in the distance was Michael Newman, walking straight to the home of Pastor Kunz.